Well, I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and I come from a family of stamp collectors. And my grandfather was a stamp collector. My late Uncle Clark, my late brother Dave, and my dad are all stamp collectors. When I was 10 years old, I was taken to Saturn Coins and Stamp on Tupper Street, and they bought me this Liberty stamp album from H.E. Harris. And I just fell in love with the hobby. It was just so astounding to me. I enjoyed the history that was on stamps, the people on stamps. I learned a lot about geography. And I worked in a stamp store for 3 years as a teenager. And I was given either $1 an hour or $2 an hour when I took my payout in stamps, which I almost always did. And growing up in Western New York, we learned about our heritage and our culture, including this slide, the Pan American Exposition. It was a wonderful event that was held from May 1st through November 2nd in 1901. Consider it a World's Fair, and people came from everywhere. And Buffalo was hopping at the time. They had 250 trains that arrived in the city every day. They had a thriving port of Houston. They had 12 newspapers that were active at the time. And so why did they choose Buffalo? Well, this kind of helps explain it. They put Buffalo in the middle and drew a circle around it. And they realized that within a 12-hour or one-day train ride, over 40% of the population of the United States could reach Western New York. And hopefully that would ensure the attendance at the Pan Am and its success. Also, and you can see that this also goes up, there's Ottawa and Montreal, Quebec. So that didn't even include Canada's participation. So they were also trying to showcase the energy of Niagara, which caused Buffalo to be called the Electric City at that time. Many people had never seen electricity, so it was really a big deal, and that's why Buffalo was chosen. Now, they made plans for the expo for years and years beforehand. I think they got the bid in 1895, and so they had all these committees and things like that, and a lot of ideas were kicked around, and I'm really disappointed that this one never came about. It would have been wonderful to see a giant buffalo with a restaurant and an observatory and lights coming out of its eyes, and unfortunately that didn't happen, but this did. This is the entranceway to the Pan Am, the four welcoming pillars and a large flag there. A just wonderful shot in relation to the size of the people. And the focal point of the expo was this structure, 400 foot tall. It's called the Electric Tower, and actually could be seen from Canada on a clear day. Folks that were visiting the falls would be able to see this. And at night, it was particularly spectacular. The grounds had almost 250,000 light bulbs on the grounds of the Pan Am. And as I mentioned, some people had never experienced that before. And around 7:30 at night in one of the maintenance warehouses, these fellows turned these giant rheostats, and eventually, it was slow, but eventually a pink hue came over the grounds. And here's what people saw. It was just amazing. And my favorite testimonial is a lady that wrote, "It was as if the hand of God came down and touched our city." So it was a wonderful thing for many to experience, and some for the very first time seeing electricity. Now, with any big thing like this, who else wants to get involved but the post office? And these 6 bicolor commemorative stamps were issued with a transportation theme. They were America's first 2-color commemorative stamps. There had been bicolor stamps issued in 1869, yet those are considered definitive stamps. These are the first bicolor commemoratives, and they were very popular. Only sold actually between that May 1st and November 2nd window at post offices. Now, there was a whole lot of other stamps issued commercially, either to promote the Pan Am or to make a profit from. And here's just a smattering. There's actually 216 different. And so here's a little over a dozen. You may recognize this one on the bottom row there because it's a direct takeoff of the Canadian Christmas stamp of 1898. All they did was changed the wording and put some bison heads where the 2-cent denominations were. So Canada 85 and 86 are immortalized in this 1898 Cinderella stamp. Cinderellas actually were called labels or stickers back then. And the term Cinderella was coined in 1959, but there were a lot of people that collected these. This top stamp, the map stamp, it's not expensive. You can find them for maybe $3 to $10. This is actually a really nicely centered one. And there is a variation that looks just like this that was issued on thin paper, and those might sell for $15 or something like that. When I worked at the stamp store, I saved as many Cinderella stamps for the Pan Am as I could. And I'll go in a little closer. These are stamps that is out of the building series. It's 20 stamps, 5 different colors, and these are not expensive at all. And there's actually 19 pavilions and one of Niagara Falls, but I stashed as many of these as I could. They're inexpensive. Today you can find them for $2 to maybe $8. And so as an adult, I decided that I would like to put out a pamphlet that pictured all of these Cinderellas and created a numbering system so that other collectors would know what to collect and could acquire sets, put together sets. I mentioned there's 100 of these, and actually there's 4 variations of the electric tower one. So there's 104, but it's not difficult to put together a set of these. And so a few years back, I sorted what I had. There's green, blue, red, brown, and purple. The purple ones are the tougher ones to find. They came out in 1900. The green, blue, red, brown came out in 1899. But the purple aren't expensive. They just aren't as easy to find as quickly. You can put together a set in a year or two. I just bought some purple ones last week for $5 a piece to try and get a few more sets of purple put together. But so then the next step was to sort them into 100 piles. And here we are, 20 different images in 5 different colors equals 100. So I then went to a stamp show where I live in Houston, and I brought this idea to a fellow. And by this time, I also understood that there were 2 men primarily associated with the Cinderella stamps for the Pan American Exposition. And so when I visited my friend named Jonathan Topper, he suggested that I pursue the story, the telling of the story. Jonathan Topper of Topper Stamps said it would really be a nice thing for philately to enjoy. So I did. And yet at the same time, I felt, how do you go about telling the life stories of 2 men born in the 1870s that were not famous, and they just happened to be stamp dealers? And so I wound up here in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, the American Philatelic Center. And actually now I've been a member for 41 years. And this is home also to the American Philatelic Research Library. And that's a wonderful place. I've been there many times now since I began the project. And they welcomed me. The first time I went was a Monday morning, and there was 54 items on a table with Mr. Barrett on it. I had notified them before about my interest in my project, and they've been great. And what I didn't understand until I went there is that you are able to check out stamp journals 5 at a time and then send them back and get another 5. And so I began doing that. And that's how I was able to get information on these 2 people. I wanted to tell their life stories. I wound up checking out books from the APRL as well as a few other philatelic libraries. And I went through over 6 years, a number of journals. I went through 50,000 pages, page by page, at looking for items pertaining to these 2 fellas. And they might be letters to the editor, a notice that they were putting out a new list or a catalog. Maybe there were a lot of advertisements, and it was just a thrill when I would find something. So I kind of had to guess, because the one guy was in Buffalo. I call him the gentleman, who I'll talk about first, and the other fellow's from Massachusetts. So I had to primarily consider the East Coast journals. And by the way, there were hundreds of stamp journals in the 1890s. So there was a lot of material to enjoy and go through. And when I would find something, I would put a Post-it note in it and go down to the copy store. And I should say that not every time did I find something in every book. You can see the top one's got 3, and that the fourth one's got a whole bunch. So you never know what I might be able to come across. And then I would make Xeroxes, including the front page of that month's or week's journal. And so that way I could credit it in the footnotes. And I was able to then file these chronologically, and then write the stories that I wanted to in the book. So it was a really fun process. I love to read. I love research. And so, as I mentioned, not every time was I able to find things pertaining to these two fellas, but I did have a great time learning about philately back then and had some fun as well. I learned about the smallest philatelist in the world, who was only 31 inches tall, and I wouldn't have known that before. And I came across this guy who was coming from South Africa to judge an exhibit in the US, I believe. And it certainly looks like he's got the credentials to judge something. And there was also a lot of interesting perspectives like this. The latest fad among some collectors, and to our mind, a very foolish one, is the collection of plate numbers. Well, we know that was pretty wild because of the boom in plate blocks and et cetera in later years. So after I had been to Bellefonte and got that ball rolling, I went back to Buffalo and I went to the Buffalo History Museum. And this is the only structure remaining that was there in 1901 at the Pan American Exposition. This was made of marble, and the other structures on the grounds of the Pan Am were made of wood or chicken wire and plaster, and they would not survive the harsh Buffalo winters. Yet in 1901, this was the New York State Pavilion. And so, like the APRL, I was welcomed there, and I got to look through their archives. It was a wonderful experience. And I looked through Buffalo City directories. Here's the first one that I found some information pertaining to the first fellow I'll talk about. His business, this is from January of 1896, and his business likely opened just in the fall of 1895 when this was being compiled. And inside was a notice for the Rayner Hubble Stamp Company. It's just over the Merchant's Worm tablets advertisement. He got the two notices at the top for free. There's the 22 Palace Arcade address, which was his business, and his home address with his mom and dad and brother and cousin was 172 Franklin Street, which is actually still there. It's been it's over a pub a lot of times, but this is where Mr. Hubble first appeared, and his opening of a stamp business in Buffalo was noted in several of those 12 newspapers. Here's one of the notices, and it says that he's established the first office for the business of buying, selling, and exchanging stamps, which Buffalo has ever had. So in a sense, he is the dean of philately for Buffalo, New York. He was also a distributor of Scott's products and stamp. He sold a lot of stamp albums. You can find ads that are in the fall just before around the Thanksgiving and Christmas time. And he was really pushing new stamp albums for parents to buy for kids and get active into the hobby. The oldest cover I've ever found is this one from December 1895. It has a rubber stamp corner card in the upper left and sent to Wisconsin, registered. 6 months later, he had a printed corner card. Palace Arcade is the same address there. And he was an amazing marketer. I gotta say, he had a thriving mail order business. He was advertising classified ads in a number of those 12 newspapers in standard publications. And in the philatelic press, he was all over those stamp journals. I mean, he was everywhere. And so if you did any mail order with him, you received a cover like this. Rayner Hubble covers aren't necessarily expensive, but they are not easy to find. You don't come across them every day, but when you do, if they're typed, they usually have this purple typewriter ribbon that he loved to use as kind of a characteristic of his things. But he didn't just market by mail. He did a lot of in-person sales, and he gave out these, which is a little bigger than a postcard. They're thick stock. It notes his address at the 22 Palace Arcade. A photographer down Main Street wound up creating these for him. And this is a recent find with some really great Canadian stamps pictured on it. So he was giving these away, hopefully to prospective collectors and customers. His business was so good that he had to move from 22 Palace Arcade to 1618 Palace Arcade. And he noted that he was the largest stamp business in the United States between New York and Chicago. If we kind of zoom in here, it says rare postage stamps bought and sold. That says R.H. Hubble Stamp Company, and really neat cachet there. This is actually his handwriting. He's got a very distinctive handwriting. That is Mr. Hubble's himself. Now, when business grew and the Pan American Exposition got closer and closer, he decided to move his business down to Lower Main Street, where there was even more commerce, and he wound up in the Ellicott Square building. Maybe if you've been to Buffalo, you've seen this. It's a beautiful structure, still there. And in 1896, when this opened, it was the largest office building in the entire world, and for a number of reasons. One of them, if you were next door, you worked next door on the fourth floor, you were going to walk up 4 flights. The Ellicott Square building had 2 banks of elevators. It also had its own security force. It had 3,500 employees working in the Ellicott Square every day, and 15,000 people came through the Ellicott Square building every day. So Rayner Hubble wanted to be where the action was, and he moved his business to the lobby of the Ellicott Square building. This is how it looks today. I was given permission when I visited to take pictures, and I believe that there's only 4 kiosks back then, and I believe Mr. Hubble's was in this lower left area where we'll see. When he was around, this flooring wasn't there. That was put in 1931. There's 23 million pieces of Italian tile on that floor. It's just a beautiful structure. And so Mr. Hubble wanted to move there, and being in mail order, another attraction was the mail service. Why, they had 14 collections every single day, and 2 of them on Sunday. There were 5 deliveries every day. So for someone like Mr. Hubble doing mail order, it was really a choice place to consider. His next cover that I've acquired, this is from 1900. He notes that he's a dealer in rare and curious postage stamps in the Grand Court of the Ellicott Square building. And I'll zoom in here. I believe that the artist that he had create this probably saw Mr. Hubble here. Here's his helper, who we'll also note in a moment. And I believe people walked here to the left that he could engage with while they were on their way to that bank of elevators. So that's just a hunch, but I think it's a pretty decent hunch. There's that purple typewriter ribbon again. And another marketing tool that he created and was used then is this. And it's a card. It says, "This is a foreign stamp. Do you collect them? We deal in them." There's that same image. And it says, "Everyone should become interested in this fascinating and instructive pursuit. To bring about this, we make a great offer." And there's a coupon on the side. I've only seen this once, and I just got this recently and would have loved to include it in the book. But it, again, reinforces what a terrific marketer Rayner Hubble was. So I'm excited to have added this to my collection. In 1899, Hubble created his own souvenir stamp, what we now call a Cinderella stamp, for the Pan American Exposition. I call this the Bison and Shield stamp. This is a beautiful example, well-centered. These aren't expensive either. These sell for $3 to $10, depending on, the gum or lack of it, or its centering. In the lower left here is the Port of Buffalo with R.H. Stamp Company. And in the lower right, you've got the image of the Ellicott Square building. He didn't have enough room to write Ellicott Square, so he just put Ellicott and a square. So he was a resourceful fellow. And this was one of the 5 Cinderella stamps that he initially distributed. There's the map stamp in the top in the middle. This one in the upper right, I call the Charging Buffalo. And there's actually 6 varieties of this one. Some of them have grass behind the hoof here. Another has a dot over the P. And so those are detailed in the stamp appendix of my book. The lower left is what I call the appropriations or flag stamp, which notes the amount of startup money that was given for the Pan American Exposition to get going. In the lower right is one of 3 different diamond-shaped stamps. This is the standing buffalo that's all red, and it was actually manufactured in Buffalo. And so for the most part, these are not expensive. This flag stamp was also issued in roulette as well as standard perfs. The roulettes are a little tougher. One of the charging buffaloes extremely rare. That's got a Spanish-American War veterans overprint on it. This diamond shape might sell in the $8 to $20 range, again, depending on condition and other factors. So how would Hubble sell these? He would sell them by mail on postcards like this. And this card, flag with a flag image, is a Morris Schoenlein card. Rayner Hubble has his advertising information on the back. Actually, check out this one. It's got his purple typewriter ribbon again. Schoenlein had to get permission and copyright from the U.S. Congress by using a flag-related image. Even though he didn't show all the stars, he put this bison head here, and he got permission there. Now, these probably sell in the $50 range up to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars. The interesting thing about these is I believe that it was his that put these Cinderella stamps on, because they sold a fair number of these. The rarest one ever uncovered is this one, sent to British Guiana, 8,000 miles away. And as you can see, the Cinderella stamps are in a different place there. There's the purple typewriter ribbon there. So he also sold these Cinderella stamps in a larger quantity in envelopes like this, 100 assorted for 10 cents. These envelopes are very difficult to find. I've been collecting now since that wonderful introduction. I've gained another year, so 54 years. I've gotten a handful of these that have actually had stamps inside them, and that's very hard to find. And you never got 20 of each or anything like that. You might get 13 of this one and 17 of that and 22 of that, whatever they had laying around, singles and blocks. And the next one might, you get 17 charging buffalo in this one, and you got 23 in the next. So whatever, probably because they were making those postcards, whatever could get up to 100. There's also other versions of this that note the number of stickers of these that Hubble had sold. So there's several varieties, 4 or 5 varieties of these. Now here's an example of a beautiful cover that's got a Pan American cachet on the left. Actually, these were also issued in several colors, red, brown, I think there might be a blue. So there's 4 or 5 of those. This has 4 of those Cinderella stamps on it. It's also got a documentary stamp, a half cent, and in the lower left, a proprietary stamp. Neither of these are authorized, and you certainly can't use them for postage, but it made for a great cover. So I really like this. One of the things, if you're ever seeing covers with Cinderellas on them, that the real hope is that you find them that have cancellations over them that are, quote, tied to the cover, rather than just, say, seeing a stamp that's uncanceled or has no markings on it in the corner, say. Another cover that's got examples is this one has 6 building stamps on the front, just a beautiful example, and a whopping 11 more on the back. I mean, can you believe they almost got all 20 examples on this? And what a joy that they essentially were preserving philatelic history and other history by doing so. So that was really a neat find. Now, when the Pan American Exposition opened in May of 1901, philatelic publications, many of them put out special editions, including this one, the Metropolitan Philatelist. This was edited by John W. Scott of Scott's Catalog fame a few weeks after the Pan Am opened. And I want to show Mr. Hubble's full-page ad there, because in the 1890s, most advertising, easily 95%, regardless of the size of the ad, the only difference was the style of the type or the size of the type. Mr. Hubble really wound up forging some new ground, and he had artwork in his ads. I love that he just devoted a third of his possible marketing potential to just promoting the Pan Am itself. And here's those stickers. By this time, he'd sold over 3.5 million of them. By the time the Pan Am would run its course in the fall of 1901, that would increase to 4.5 million. He was an amazing, amazing marketer. At this time, he would have been 27 years old, and there was no internet, there was no television, no radio to market things. He was doing this all by mail order business, or he didn't sell 3.5 or 4.5 million in the Elegant Square building. So he was really doing a lot of great advertising. I like all the other novelties that he's selling. And he says, you haven't seen Buffalo unless you've seen our shop. So Hubble was a lot of fun to get to know through my research. The summer of 1901 saw several philatelic societies hold their annual conventions there, because then people could visit the Pan American Exposition or Niagara Falls. This image was taken in the gorge of the Niagara River, and every person has a number. There was another page that told who they were. And in the very back row there, number 12 is Rainer Hubble. I was ecstatic when I found this after my book published, but here's an image of it without the number. And as I said, he was 27 years old at this time, and this is the earliest picture of him that I've ever found. So Hubble was a really fun guy to get to know. I guess you'd say, oldest or newest, however you characterize it, cover of his pertaining to the Pan American Exposition. This would be 10 months later after it closed, 1902. Beautiful artwork on the left. That's his handwriting there. This is the last that I could find any Pan American related items pertaining to Rainer Hubble. What did he do? He went into corporate America till about 1948. So that's about 46 years after this. He lived until 1961. And here he is at his desk in his 80s. And he became an unbelievably well-respected and well-known specialist in Civil War philately and postal history. So the stories of Rainer Hubble are inside my book, Buffalo Cinderellas. And now let's shift gears to the other guy that is in the book. And the stamps associated with him look like this. They are Niagara Falls, which is on the top, and the bottom one, Bridge and Whirlpool. Now, when the water goes over Niagara Falls, it goes down the river, the gorge a little ways, and it went under this bridge that was there until 1938. It actually fell into the river here due to an ice jam. And yet there are 86 varieties total, 43 of the top one, 43 of the bottom. Most of them have different color frames or different color center vignettes. There's a few that are all one color, but 43 of the top, 43 of the bottom. Now, the fellow associated with these is William B. Hale, William Bennett Hale. He was a stamp merchant in Williamsville, Massachusetts, and this guy is a real character. And so 82 of the 82 of the 86 stamps have this on the bottom. The other 4 don't have the word stamp merchants, and those details are in the stamp appendix. But I saved these as well, but these are very difficult to find. Out of 86 varieties, you can find maybe 12 to 18, a little over a dozen now and then. There's 4 you can easily locate, one of them being this red and charcoal down here. Is always available inexpensively, but and the others might be $12 to $20. But even that, for reference, in 54 years of collecting, I've only put together one full set of 84. I have a second set that's got 82, and I hope I can find the other 2 someday. They're not easy at all to locate, but they're fun to collect as well. So the first notice that I had of William B. Hale in collecting journals was actually in this Golden Argosy. Some people may recall the magazine named Argosy magazine. This was the predecessor of it. This was from December 1896, and W.B. Hale of Williamsville, Mass. was talking about coins and stamps in here. He would have been 15 years old. And William also wrote 3 stamp journals in the 1880s. This is the first. This little thing is about the size of a business card. It's a 4-page thing. I'm showing you here on the left, the front. And on the back, not the two inner pages, which are basically the other sides of these, this is volume 12 of the Philatelic Bazaar. Only 4 of the 12 issues are known to exist. They're all at the Smithsonian in their collection. What's interesting to me is this one talks about forgeries, counterfeit stamps. If you look over on the left at his advertisement, after the popular stamp dealer under his name, he says, all stamps sold by me are guaranteed genuine. And what that says is that William, as a youngster, had his finger on the pulse of what is right and wrong. So he definitely grew up with a moral compass that would later on change. The same year, he published this one on the left, The Collector's World, a monthly international journal in the interest of collectors of all branches. And then on the right, a year later, November 1888, he put out The Stamp Collector's World. And what I noticed was, first of all, William was a smart kid, or teenager, youngster, however you want to characterize him. He came from a well-to-do family. His dad in the small town of Williamsville owned a general store. He was the American Express agent and also in charge of sending telegrams. He was the justice of the peace, and he was the postmaster. So he came from a family of means, I believe, and he certainly was educated. And putting the stamp journals together, he was able to write well each time a new one came out. He could formulate mature opinions, and so he was off and running, and he was operating his stamp business through these and other advertisements. The oldest cover I've ever found of William B. Hale is this one from 1888. That's his handwriting on it, and the stamp is upright, a printed corner card, which suggests maybe he had one before that. I just don't know. The next one from 1889 had a different corner card, noting that he did wholesale and retail. Philatelic publications and supplies were available from him. And there's his handwriting on all of these that we'll see. The stamp is on its side. And a few years later, this is another printed corner card with the stamp upside down. And then we see this in 1894. All 3 stamps are upside down with a rubber stamped corner card. And then another one. This is from 1895, the stamp upside down, this black and white sticker in the upper left. Now I have another cover with this sticker on the back flap. This is a little more interesting, but so William did things in a variety of ways. This was sent to Mr. Hubert Atherton, who was a well-known stamp collector. His name popped up in the journals now and then in letters and things like that. What I was thrilled to find when I acquired this was that inside was a handwritten letter from William B. Hale, signed by him at the bottom, to Mr. Hubert Atherton. And what's interesting was how he worded things. So he mentions that, Mr. Atherton, have you no other things to exchange? Haven't heard from you or Campbell either. How is that? I can have no crooked work. Let me hear. So he was pretty abrupt, but an interesting guy. And, around this time, he wound up doing less and less mail order and more traveling. And he mentioned in one of the articles that it was because of a dwindling eyesight, but he was in his 20s. And but he did a lot of traveling, initially down the East Coast, and then he would move further to the West, in the Midwest. And so this advertisement was in a journal called The Perforator, and he says, from Maine to Mexico, the stamp drummer. The term drummer was like a traveling salesman. So he was the traveling stamp drummer. And it says that he's going to go to travel this winter along the Atlantic coast states. This is the first photo of William B. Hale that I was ever able to uncover. It came from the Collectors Club of New York, is where I found it. It may be in other libraries, but editors loved to meet William. He was a personable guy. He was exciting. He had a great selection of stamps to show them. They weren't all real, but they were exciting. And he would frequently speak at clubs like this, obviously not by Zoom, but he would appear at stamp clubs. And but what I also sensed was that he could not return to these same places easily again and again because he was selling fake stamps, fake cancellations. And so he had to broaden his travels in order to continue making what he made. And so he eventually made it all the way out west. And this is a stamp journal called Philatelic Facts and Fallacies, edited by Wilhelm Shellshop, who had a thriving business in San Francisco. Shellshop was a really good dealer and well-respected guy. He couldn't spell too well, but he certainly wrote well. And in this issue from November 1898, he did a really nice feature on William B. Hale, who had visited their city probably the weeks before. And William told of all these wild antics that had occurred to him, and Shellshop published only the second known photo of William B. Hale. You can kind of get an idea of his character, who this huckster was. And but the journal was an exciting issue to read because it told all these things, that he was like a magnet for craziness to occur. I like to say that if he was around today, he'd have a reality TV show. It was just amazing hearing of so many different things that happened to Hale, including he was on a bicycle that was hit by a team of horses. He was laid up in the hospital for quite some time. He was on a train in Mexico that was held up by banditos. And as he told the story, the only reason everyone survived was because of the rabbit's foot in his pocket. And other editors loved to see William B. Hale. Here's that same image, a different publication. This is off of Long Island, I believe. And it says, "We take pleasure in presenting to our readers." You know, they looked upon this guy as a good fella. And it mentions all these travels on the road for 5 years, visiting nearly every state: Mexico, Honolulu, Canada. Honolulu, Hawaii wasn't a state then, but he actually did a lot of business in Canada. He did a lot of business in Newfoundland. And so he continued to do what he could, and he found he even needed to expand his travels further. So in July of 1900, he wound up on the SS Saxonia. I found his name on the passenger manifest for this ship, and he went with an interpreter from Worcester, Mass., which was right near Williamsville, overseas. It took several days, and they wound up in England, and he did some business there. And then he went to France, and he wound up at the Paris Bourse. Consider this an outdoor stamp show, an outdoor flea market focusing on stamps. And William loved this place. This was a thrill for him to be at. There were a lot of fakes and forgeries there. There were a lot of pickpockets there. If you set your album down, you better watch it, because it was going to be gone. Hence, that's probably why William liked this place. But it was hopping. And so William wound up connecting with some of those editors back home and telling about it. This is a publication called the Stamp Collectors Fortnightly that put out a feature of philatelists on the Rialto. And there we are, from a letter from Paris, Mr. William B. Hale. He says the Paris Bourse is an institution unknown in the United States or any other city. It was just a thrill. By the way, the Paris Bourse still exists. It's near the Champs-Élysées. Although today it's not stamp related. If you go there, they're selling postcards and buttons and touristy type things. So, but it's still there. In fact, they put a little souvenir sheet out, the French post office did, 12 years ago, that honored this stamp bourse. So it was the 150th anniversary, which suggests that it began in 1860. So a little bitty souvenir sheet, $10 thing, but it's pretty neat. So while in Paris, William B. Hale met a printer named Alfred Baguette. And Alfred Baguette printed these and well over 100 other stamps for the 1900 Paris Exposition. And he put out a lot of neat Cinderella stamps, and he is the one that wound up printing 82 of the 86 William B. Hale related stamps. And if you look, this is one of the ones that doesn't have stamp merchant in it in the bottom there. Here's the other one. So that this charcoal and red and this slate and brown, those are easy to find, maybe $8 to $10. There's also versions of these too with the bridge and whirlpool on them, and those are about the same price. It's the other ones, the ones that have his full name and stamp merchant that can be difficult to find. This bottom one is actually green metallic. He did metallic green, metallic gold, metallic silver, metallic bronze. It's just an amazing work that Mr. Alfred Baguette did. The problem is that William stiffed him and he didn't pay the bill. And so Baguette was stuck with all these stamps. And really the only places that I have been able to find them have been in 4 places that Baguette likely wholesaled them: France, Belgium, England or the United Kingdom, and India. I've found a few dealer lots in India and in the UK, and that's it. They're tough. And so my sense is Baguette had some connections there and at least got the money that he printed them with out of it. So that trip also took him all over Western and Eastern Europe. This is the story of William B. Hale abroad. It's a 12-page publication, extremely, extremely rare. It notes all the countries that he went to between July of 1900 and October of 1901. Well, the Pan American Exposition closed November 2nd, 1901, and actually there's no verification that William B. Hale ever made it to the Pan American Expo, even though his name is on those stamps. But he certainly made it to a lot of countries. This is a thrilling story. The only copy I've ever found is in the Royal Collection of the British Museum. And I had to pay a lot to get the scans of it so I could then read it and tell the stories. Now, he did amazing things during this 15-month trip. He went first class when he could. He went last class when he had to. He slept in a barn with goats. He drank goat's milk. One thing said that he ate hay one time when there was no food. And just an amazing, amazing experience. He tried to not only sell stamps, but buy stamps wherever he could. And, you know, to illustrate what an amazing guy this was, when he was in Italy, he wound up meeting the Pope. Now, when you go to the Vatican, you can't just knock on the door and say, I'd like to meet the Pope. But somehow William B. Hale wound up with an audience with Pope Leo XIII. And it just illustrates what a wildcat this guy was. Just amazing, amazing things happened to William B. Hale. When he got home, the next thing that I found was October 24th on the East Coast. He wound up staying here in the Plaza Hotel in New York. This is first class place. And he spoke at a stamp club, I think on Long Island or New Jersey, October 24th. And so that would have only left him literally a week to get to the Pan Am. So I'm not sure he ever made it there. But he stayed here and lived first class for quite some time. He actually was in this hotel in February of 1902 when the hotel had a horrific fire. 17 people died. It was front page news across the country. And William was seriously injured with smoke inhalation. He was in hospital, Bellevue Hospital, and he was lucky to have survived, actually. The next thing that we find of William B. Hale was several years later in this January 1906 stamp journal from Germany. And I had this translated, and what occurred is he had been selling fake stamps to collectors in Germany, and they couldn't get their money back once they figured out that he'd burned them. And so they contacted a very reputable stamp dealer and auctioneer named J.M. Bartles, who was in Boston. J.M. Bartles, by the way, is in the Philatelic Hall of Fame. And so Bartles came to their aid, and he confronted Hale somewhere probably in Massachusetts, and William agreed to make restitution to anyone that contacted him. There's no proof that that ever occurred one way or another, but what did occur is it pretty much ruined his ability to advertise in the philatelic press anymore. And there was no more William B. Hale ads to be seen after that. What did he do? In 1906, later on, he wound up becoming a postcard publisher. This is just a smattering of cards with his name on the back. I have about almost 200 and almost 300, and I've got a list with another 90. So that's about almost 400. I sense there's about 500. Most are just, small towns in central Massachusetts or nature scenes, things like that. And that's what he distributed for a while. He didn't do Boston, so somebody else probably had that territory and may have been, suggested he keep that to him, keep out of there. But not a lot is known for maybe 15 years about William B. Hale. And so I'm going to shift gears here because the next slide shows a warning from, this is a current warning from the USPS, United States Postal Service, and it talks about that it's a crime, a federal crime, to remove, attempt to remove, or assist to remove cancellation marks from postage or reuse a stamp, whether canceled or not. Well, since stamps were issued, there have been people trying to take the cancellations off of them and reuse stamps. Goes all the way back, maybe not to the 1840s, but definitely the 1860s. And when I read these journals from primarily the 1890s, there were a lot of notices of so-and-so getting arrested for stamp washing. That's what the term was called, stamp washing. And they somehow knew the chemicals. The post office couldn't figure it out. They tried different inks. If you're familiar with some US stamps that have grills on them, that's why they put grills on them, because the grills would hopefully absorb the ink better and you couldn't wash the ink off. And a lot of people were, imprisoned for 3 to 6 months, some a year, fined $300 to a couple $1,000 for stamp washing, depending on what they'd done. Well, William did this in the 1920s, maybe the teens. And yet, how did he get his stamps to clean? Well, he advertised, and this is from 1922, as Spot Cash Williams. This is his name he used. This is a publication from England. And I also saw them. You mentioned that there's folks interested in the Boy Scouts. He advertised in Boy's Life as well as Spot Cash Williams. And he went to town cleaning as many stamps as he could. He would clean them, re-gum them, and sell them to companies anywhere from 50% to 75% of face. So the companies liked it. They didn't know there was anything wrong. And William would make a buck. Well, the post office caught up with him, and he was sentenced to 1 year and a day here in the Worcester County Jail. And he served his sentence here, pretty much all of it. A few weeks were in the Worcester Hospital when he was ill. And, all for stamp washing. And when he got out, did he learn his lesson? Absolutely not. He went to Charleston, South Carolina. He lived first class here in the Charleston Hotel. First class, he had 2 suites here. And he not only washed stamps out of one of them, he lived in one suite, he washed stamps out of the other suite, and he developed a network of 8 people around the country that would supply him with boxes and boxes of stamps to clean, preferably higher values, 50-cent ones, $1, $2, $5. Initially, they were doing those $100 revenue stamps that you had to put on deeds in the United States. So he was making great money, and he was making so much that it was over $3,000 a day. That's in today's money, that's over $1 million a year. Actually, in 1928 money, over $1 million a year. Today's money, that'd be $15 million. That's just an astounding rate of participation that he had there. Here's a notice from room 221 in the Charleston Hotel to Frank Marquis on Nassau Street. William B. Hale at the bottom, the Charleston Hotel. I think this is from some bids or auctions that maybe Mr. Marquis had, but this is a few weeks before his second arrest. The post office department at that time, not the Postal Service, that changed in the early 70s, but the post office department got wind of it, and they put this fella on the case, Bill Kenyon of the Postal Inspectors. And I found this book. When he was ready to retire, he wrote his memoirs. And I'll tell you, this book is really, really hard to find. When published in the early 60s, I don't think people cared about reading about postal inspectors, and it didn't sell well, which is probably why it's hard to find. But the stories are great. He talks about his early time as a postal inspector before the FBI and the post office would get robbed and banks would get robbed in small towns, and the inspectors would help the bank to follow up after robberies, etc. And, it was like the Wild West. Well, that the reason that I point this out is because in the last chapter, or one of the ones near the end, Kenyon says, of all the crooks in 40 years that I've encountered, the one that was most egregious and outrageous was a fellow named William B. Hale. And he went and, with a couple other postal inspectors, arrested William B. Hale in late March of 1929. And at 9 in the morning, they came into Suite 221. William had his apron on and was washing stamps. And William said to him, "Oh, this is my own collection. I cannot have a dirty stamp. I must wash my stamps." And they knew he was fibbing. And so they said, "Come on, you're coming with us." And he said, "Wait, can you come back tomorrow? I have to give a stamp talk to the YMCA today." And this guy was just wild. He would just, try to weasel out of anything that he could. Well, he couldn't weasel out of this one easily. They took him to the Charleston County Jail, and they froze his assets. He had no money then, had no access to money. He couldn't make bail. He could not easily retain counsel. And so his attorneys were not as motivated to help him. Now, point this out because this is one of the few mentions in decades in the postal press. This is Lynn's Stamp News that notes that Hale was arrested again. And it was just difficult to uncover any information about Hale. I got more from the standard newspapers, as you saw the previous slide. So anyway, later that spring, they really had him, because one of the things that they found when they arrested him was his ledger and his journal. And William kept great records. It shows who he bought stamps from and who he sold it to, and they had him. And so he wound up creating an admission of guilt, and this is what he essentially signed. He mentions wash stamps here. He bought some for $64. Here he bought some more for $50 that he had to return some to get a little credit because he was up against it. Well, the guy was making $1 million a year. He wasn't up against it, but who was he trying to? And he was saying that these were not washed. And he says, "I'm an old man, 58 years of age, and I'm in poor physical condition, and I trust you will act accordingly," trying to get some leeway from the federal judge that was sentencing him. And that really didn't happen. About a week after this, in early June 1929, he was sentenced to 20 months in the federal penitentiary in Atlanta. In fact, they put him on a train to Atlanta the next day after sentencing. And he did not do well in jail, the penitentiary, those 20 months. I read letters back to his attorney on a variety of subjects, 35 letters I read, and he did not handle it well. He was bullied. The food was bad. Obviously, it's penitentiary in the 30s, and he was in very, very poor health in their infirmary for a while. And so the next thing that I found of merit was this, that noted that the Department of Justice sent this letter to his attorney. In fact, this Thomas P. Stoney and his partner, one of the partners' grandson, still practices in Charleston, but they noted that his parole was approved effective August 10th because he didn't pay the law firm. In fact, they were given stamps, but by some friend of Hale's, but they didn't have a lot of incentive to do much legal work for him. He had actually been eligible back in December of 1929. So the trail kind of went cold here. And I'm looking in the standard press, I'm looking in philatelic press, and I couldn't find anything for years until postal markings turned up. This is December 1936, the first of a three-part feature. The next two issues of postal markings in 1937 mention some Hale hand stamps. And what it says is, when the late William Hale passed away during a sojourn in federal custody in Atlanta, the public executor found in his possessions a quantity of hand stamps and cancellation blocks which were destroyed by the executor. Well, this information here that's highlighted was perpetuated for over 80 years in more than a dozen stamp publications, including this one, the Newfie Newsletter in 2008. And it noted that Hale was a traveling stamp salesman questionable ethics, who peddled bogus items. Yes, he did. William Hale was also jailed at one point, actually two, and died in federal penitentiary in 1936. Huh? And then when Hale died, a number of forged hand stamps were found, including one for St. John's, Newfoundland. Well, and as I say, these same things are noted as recently as 2012, 10 years ago, in philatelic journals. And yet, the more I read it, I just kept wondering, I've read this stuff from 1942 to 2012, this same information. You can't, and I'm not finding any notice of his death or parole or anything. And I'm like, well, it said he was paroled August 10th of 1929. Why would he die in 1936? And so I wound up contacting the Department of Justice. And here in the States, you can do what's called a Freedom of Information Act request. And, you hear it on the news. It's really easy, actually. You just fill out a form online and give them $32 and tell them what you need. And I did. And I wound up getting William B. Hale's prison card. It noted conspiracy to clean canceled stamps. Here's his initial eligibility for parole, December of 1929. At a special meeting, they noted, and his parole was granted for August 10th, 1930. But check this out. He died September 18th, 1930. That's 5 weeks later after he got out of the penitentiary at Massachusetts General Hospital of heart disease. Well, I was ecstatic when I found this. This was amazing. And yet also, there's his prison number at the bottom. If you want to print something, most journalists want a second source before you go to press. So I spent a lot of time trying to confirm this information. And I wound up with four things total, including this. The second one was this. This is the standard certificate of death issued by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the town of Hubbardston. Now, Williamsville, Mass. Is part of Hubbardston. As of 1926, Hubbardston became a dead post office. All mail was then canceled Hubbardston. But if you travel there today, it's just a tiny town in central Massachusetts. It's Hubbardston, but you see notes of Williamsville. This is William Bennett Hale, and it confirms he died September 18th, 1930. And down here, there's the undertaker that signed it, or is noted. He was buried 2 days later, September 20th of 1930, in Forest Hill Cemetery. And this is out in the middle of nowhere. And who helped me was the cemetery caretaker, put me in touch with the town clerk, which is what I got another confirmation of. And, so I wind up out here on early Sunday morning, and I see this is where William B. Hale was. And wouldn't you know, this cemetery, little bitty place, is on the corner of Williamsville Road and Hale Road Extension. So maybe that's because of his dad's activity in the town and how highly he was regarded. But anyway, William rests for eternity in the family plot. We don't know where. He's somewhere here because the family name with his Hale family died with him. He had no brothers and sisters, no cousins, no anything like that, no kids. And so there's William along with other family members. So William B. Hale's exciting story is in my book, Buffalo Cinderellas, that was finally published after 6 years. It was ecstatic to experience that. I self-published it, 350 copies that are almost gone, actually. And it was wonderful to hold it in my hand. And like was mentioned, I had no idea that it would win a couple of awards. And one of the things that I want to show you are what the chapters look like inside. This is one of the William B. Hale chapters. And, there's more than 400 photos inside. And they are scattered throughout, color and black and white. They're not just all black and white stuck in the middle like a lot of books have. This has really got a nice flow to it. Here's part of one of the Rainer Hubble chapters. And you can see too, show his artwork at the bottom here, some of the advertising that he did. And it just makes for really fun, interesting reading. And in the back is a full color stamp appendix. This portion here shows the part of the building set. You can see they're all numbered there. And there's a lot of details that can help collectors and background information. here's part of the William B. Hale stamp appendix, shows the different varieties and different types there. And as I close, I also wanted to include for you one of the other neat things that's in my book is a very rare full sheet of the map stamp. I've only seen 2 of these in my life, and that takes up a whole page. So the book is Buffalo Cinderellas. That's the cover, and it's available from eBay, Amazon, or the American Philatelic Society in person in Bellefonte, or their website you can buy it from. I also actually wound up finding a couple logo block editions. Only 30 of these were made. Inside the front cover, it's numbered and signed, and there's a block of 6. That's the stamp on the front cover, and there is the Raphael Beck authentic logo for the Pan American Exposition. So I want to tip my hat to you and thank you for listening to my stories about these 2 fellas in Buffalo, New York. My email address is there. If you wanted one of the logo block editions, you'd have to contact me directly. I'm at that email address, buffalocinderellas.com. There's also a Facebook page that's quite fun. It was started 10 years ago, and it's got a lot of neat things about the process of doing research and things like that. You don't have to be a Facebook member to enjoy that. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed it.